Okay, we might as well get going here. Hi, everybody. I'm Mark, one of the co-chairs. Derek's the other one. He'll be jumping in shortly. Tonight we got Chris Taylor, who created some games that I'm not overly familiar with from my misspent youth. Derek keeps showing me with all these these games that I didn't see as a kid. Maybe my youth wasn't as misspent as his. But you know, Chris had some of the things he did was Hardball II, and I can't recall the other one, but I'm sure he'll tell us. I know it has the number 96 at the end.
Triple play.
Triple play 96. There we go. So Chris, you and Derek set up, so I'm gonna give you the floor and put myself on mute here for a little while. And welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Oh, I just wanted to check, Chris, do you want to share your screen? Do you have any slides or anything you want to demo, or you just want to speak for a bit?
Yeah, I'll just do a verbal. I'll try to keep it fun and entertaining, and I mean, I do have all sorts of decks, but I have a lot of decks that are informative to baseball specifically, other than just screenshots. Because what I'm going to talk about probably is things like statistics engines and how important statistics are and things like that, which an image doesn't convey. So I'm just going to give you guys some stuff to get insights and some fun stories, if you'd like.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, go right ahead.
All right. Well, you know, guys, I have been developing games since I was 14. I'm 57 now. And I started when I was 21. I got a job in 1988. In 1988, I walked into this software development company. It was called Distinctive Software. It was in Burnaby, British Columbia. And they said, Chris, we'd like you to make the sequel to Hardball. We'd like you to do Hardball II. And Hardball 1 was a game designed by a gentleman named Bob Whitehead. He was one of the engineers at Atari who went on to found, I believe he went on to work at Activision. He was one of the founders of Activision. I could be mistaken, but I think that's true. And then he went on to found a company called Accolade. And so he kind of moved through these different things, and home computers were really becoming a thing. Home consoles were in kind of competition with home computers. The Apple II, as you guys all familiar with, the Apple II Plus, the Commodore 64 was what this Hardball was developed for. And there was other systems, TRS-80 and the Atari and so forth. The Atari home computer, Atari 800. If I recall. Man, I'm digging up these memories. And Hardball was a big deal. Like the original Hardball by Bob Whitehead. It was very successful. And I remember being a kid in high school playing Hardball, thinking to myself, really, baseball? Because I'm Canadian, right? I mean, we're into things like soccer and hockey. Obviously, hockey is a big deal. But we weren't playing a lot of baseball. I actually was on a baseball league when I was a kid in elementary school. But I wasn't familiar with baseball enough to go, oh, great, you've chosen the right guy. You picked the guy for the job, because let me tell you about all my baseball knowledge. Instead, I went, oh boy, you've given me something that is going to be challenging in terms of the actual sport. But I dug in. I said to myself, if I'm going to build a game, I'm going to do it with everything I've got. And back then, this machine that I was building it on, and the game was going to be called Hardball 2, which it was on a 4.77. If you guys are hardcore PC, you guys know your computer specs, 4.77 megahertz 8088 based PC, which means you didn't have a lot of power. Multiply instruction didn't exist. Divide instruction didn't exist. If you wanted to do that stuff, you had to call a function that executed all this code. So you had to be, you weren't just designing a baseball game. You weren't just thinking about whacking the ball and seeing it fly out into the field, you were thinking about how to do it with the least amount of computer resources that you could spend to get a frame rate. And if you didn't have a frame rate in baseball, of all the games, you know what I mean by a frame rate? Like if you weren't going to refresh the screen 30, 40, 30 or 60 times a second, then it wasn't going to be any fun. How do you move your man around in the outfield to catch a ball if the screen is going like this? So it was sort of a weird job, because in a way, like being a highly proficient programmer and making something run really quick was competing against the priority of making a baseball game that actual baseball enthusiasts would want to play. And I'm going to tell you guys about a bunch of things that are going to kind of maybe make you go, oh, wow, that's really interesting. So the company that we were doing it for was Accolade, and they didn't have the MLBPA license, and they didn't have the MLB license. So they didn't have players, they didn't have teams. Okay. Now, I don't know what's changed in the world of licensing from then until now, because that's 35 years ago. I assume it's not much different. But when you don't have the teams that people are familiar with, if you don't have the players that people are familiar with, I mean, it's kind of not a whole lot of fun to play a baseball game where Joe Blow gets up to bat and, you know, his batting average is just something that was invented, right? So this was a problem. So we solved it by creating a team editor. And that editor would allow you to enter in all of your own statistics. Now, just like Mickey Mouse is copyrighted by Disney, that doesn't mean you at your home can't take a pen and a piece of paper and draw Mickey Mouse and stick Mickey Mouse on your wall, right? You're allowed to do that. You can violate copyright and trademark and ownership rights if you're using it for your own personal use. So we made an editor, and people could enter their own team, and they'd put in Toronto Blue Jays, and they'd put in, you know, whoever it was, you know, Ken Griffey Jr. at the time. I forget who Ken was playing for at the time. You guys probably know that. I'm pretty sure you knew who Ken was playing for in '88. But you could put your teams in, and now suddenly you had given yourself an MLB and an MLBPA license, right? And you just spent an evening. I mean, it's not a ton of work to enter this data. It's not super trivial, but it's not a ton of work. And you could enter in all the data. Now, back then I was a noob, and it was hard for me to disambiguate between an attribute of a player, a skill the player had, and a statistic that a player accrued over time. And as I developed the game, I started to understand fundamentally, you didn't give a player a batting average of 300, and then when they went up to bat and swung the ball, they had a 30% chance of hitting the ball. You had to understand that they had other attributes that allowed them to hit the ball, and a batting average was the result of them hitting the ball. Like, this is really, really important, right? Because otherwise you get a feedback loop. You get an echo chamber. You just get oh, well, if he's hitting 300, he's going to keep hitting 300. That's not how real life works. That's driven from playing, and that's a stat. Well, I can tell you that's a journey. And when I built that, and we released it, it took me around 20 months. So I think it shipped out sometime in the last part of, I may have been November of '89. Actually, I don't remember, excuse me, off the top of my head. It was an intense time. I worked every single day almost. I took no time off except for Christmas, and I worked generally 7 days a week, and I worked 10, 11, 12 hours a day. Now, I was 21 years old. And when you're 21, you don't even stop and ask yourself, what the hell are you doing? Do you have a life? Do you have a girlfriend? Do you have do you do exercise? Nothing mattered. And we'd eat pizza, we'd order pizza, and then we'd eat the leftovers, and we'd order lasagna and eat that. And we just kind of rotate through all the fast food delivery stuff and just lived at the office making these games. And you guys probably aren't interested in that part of the story so much, so I'll skip away from the life of a game developer in the late 80s. That studio that I worked at, it's called Distinctive Software, that you guys have never heard of, probably. I mean, I don't expect anyone to know of that studio. That studio was purchased in the early 90s by Electronic Arts out of San Mateo, California. Trip Hawkins was the founder of Electronic Arts, and at the time, he was still running it. He was still the CEO. He bought Distinctive Software for something like $11 million. And they renamed Distinctive to Electronic Arts Canada. We're up there in Burnaby, innocuous little studio. We started making these games, and they wanted us to make sports games because sports games were selling like gangbusters back in those days. So we did a game. You could call it a little known game, but it'd be sarcasm because it's the biggest sports franchise that was ever developed in the world. It's called FIFA Soccer. So we got the FIFA license, and the team next to me on the cubicle over, Joey Della Savia and Jan Tien and Mark Obanall and Bruce McMillan, they built FIFA Soccer for the Sega Genesis. And the success of that was like unlike anything we had ever seen. And suddenly EA Canada was on the map. We weren't just on the map in Canada and in the US, we were in the map globally, because you guys probably know that soccer is played throughout the entire world. And when you have a sport that's played throughout the entire world, it really makes a big difference. Baseball's kind of played, in the US and Japan, there's some places, right? But baseball doesn't permeate the globe. Well, they said to me, they go, Chris, the success of FIFA Soccer is so great. The folks down in San Mateo, they want you to build a baseball franchise for Electronic Arts. And we are going to start off that game, and we're going to take the code, the spirit, the style, the energy of FIFA Soccer, and we're going to build the baseball version of FIFA Soccer. And that's Triple Play Baseball. That was Triple Play 96. It was the first baseball game in the EA Sports franchise. The name of it before it was Triple Play was oh God, I think it was it wasn't Double Play. It was something like oh man, it's right there on the tip of my tongue. Maybe I'll remember it. But I remember we couldn't get the name we wanted, so we went to Triple Play. And I remember the first time I heard the name Triple Play, I was like, that feels like the runner-up name. But as you know, when you take a name and you spend tens and tens of millions of dollars and you build it over decades and decades, it becomes irrefutably the name of the game. It's like when our mothers name us. That kooky as our name may be, it's our name forever, and we own it. So it was a little bit of a moment with the naming of Triple Play Baseball. And it was developed and released in 95. And this was an interesting thing in the world of game publishing. You don't put the year of your game on your box, because then as soon as you send it to market and the year ticks over, it's like spoiled milk on the shelf. It's like nobody wants to buy Triple Play 95 when it's 96. They were like, where's the 96? So in 95, we released the 96 version. Now it's got shelf life. And then in 96 sometime, late 96, you can release 97. And then you've always got something that feels relevant to the consumer. So a little bit of an insight into game product franchise management there. I want to tell you guys a fun story, though. Back then, you guys obviously know of Disney's ESPN. ESPN was obviously the name in sports. It was like ESPN. It was just like, that was it. And so EA created a brand with their marketing team called EASN, like Electronic Arts Sports Network. Seems fair, right? Electronic Arts Sports Network, but there was no network. It's just games. So it was a bit of a trick, and they made a mistake that got them to a better place. And for any of you who are interested in these kinds of weird stories, they copied the look and feel of the logo, which you don't do. You don't copy the look and feel of a Disney logo when you're Electronic Arts. You're this little publishing company by comparison, and you're going to go ahead and you're going to rip off Disney. So they create EASN, and it looks just like ESPN. Like if you squint and you glance, you'd think it was ESPN, right? So in legal terms, they call this confusingly similar. It was confusingly similar. So Disney's lawyers write EA and they give them a memo that says, you must cease and desist, or we will take you to court and you will lose for a confusingly similar logo. And of course, the EA guys are like, of course, it was our bad. So they go back and they brainstorm and they brainstorm and they brainstorm, and they're like, I think we've got it. I mean, it's so simple. It's it's Occam's razor. The first or whatever, that's probably the right one. And that's kind of how I think of EA Sports. So they came back and they said, we've got it. It's no longer EA Sports Network. It's just simply EA Sports. And it's got the big EA and sports. And you guys know that today. They ran ads for the Sega Genesis, and the ad sounded something like this: EA Sports. It's in the game. You guys remember that? You guys remember those ads in the 90s? And those ran all through the 90s. EA Sports. Now, I didn't do the voice work, but I loved saying it because it was so catchy and so much fun to say EA Sports. And this was huge. This was huge. And they built this thing. So Triple Play 96, which you guys think of as 96, but I think about it as Triple Play because of it. I built a code base. I was the lead engineer. I wrote all the code that, you know, the logic, the game, and the glue, and all the stuff that held it together. I did that. And I actually had help from Jan Tien, who came in and did what we called Big Batter. Now, I don't know if you guys are interested in this stuff, but in baseball, you have the far shot where the ball goes out into the field, and then you have the shot, you have the batter who's standing there, and he's gonna, you know, that's the gameplay where you swing and you have the timing game to hit the ball. Okay, you got to have that kind of level of interactivity. Jan Tien came in and did Big Batter. And I didn't want Big Batter. I was like, I want to do something different. I was such a schmuck because I was like, God, of course you got to have Big Batter after the fact. And I was just overworked. I went through divorce shortly after doing that because I never saw my wife, because she wanted to get married. We got married, and then I never spent any time with her, and she ran off with my best friend. And of course she should have. I don't blame her one bit for doing that. But anyways, long story short, we built this game, and we knew we needed to make the stats engine better than the one in Hardball 2. Hardball 2 was me all by myself, pulling stuff out of my butt, just kind of doing the best I could, figuring it out, 21 years old, you know. But we said we're going to do something special. Now I got to back up a little bit because I want to. And is this interesting what I'm telling you guys? So I can stop right there. Is this interesting? Because
yes,
I can.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
I can go. I can really go. I got Jeremy I can't see. I got Steve and Jeff I can't see. So I hope you guys are you know, entertained by some of these stories. But they hired a professional. Oh, hey, okay, good. Thumbs up. Thank you. I appreciate that. I wasn't, you know, I'm just kind of checking. You know, when you give a talk to an audience, you can see the responses. You can kind of move stuff along if everyone's falling asleep. I appreciate that. So they hired a professional soccer expert for FIFA soccer. And that expert told them things you would never, ever, ever know about soccer unless you were coaching it, unless you understood the sport deeply, and it was a big deal. And I'm telling you, your who's on the field, depending on whether you're ahead a goal or behind a goal, or how the players move from up and down the field to get into position, depending on situations. If you're winning the game and there's 5 minutes left on the clock, you know, you put people in different places depending on every situation that occurs, and it's fluid. So we're going to do triple play baseball, and so of course we need a baseball expert. Right? Like, we need to bring someone in who really knows what they're talking about when it comes to baseball. So we brought an expert in, and the expert was able to tell us a lot of things about baseball. And Rick Smith, who was also a researcher on the project and worked, he would take the complexity of the sport of baseball and boil it down. And I was coding, and this, you know, everything's on a tight timeline. You got to get the work done. And he came up with something called the batter stance that is from, I hope this is a real thing in baseball, and I'm not just having a delusional moment here, but depending if you're a righty or a lefty, and whether you have an open, closed, or even stance, helps for ball placement. Well, in real life, I'm sure it's subtle. Like, you know, I don't think everyone in the stadium is looking at the player going, oh yeah, he's using an open stance or whatever. But in gaming, you have to exaggerate everything. It's like film or theater. So we had 3 stances that you could choose from with your batter. You could have an even open where you're wide and you're going to blast it up the first baseline, or you could go to the left and have a closed stance and you could blast it up third base. And then doing this, it gave you additional ball control. Because when you have a ball being thrown at you at whatever, 90 miles an hour, and you're swinging with a gamepad, a cheap ass Sega Genesis gamepad, and you're pressing this plastic button, you tell me if you think you can simulate a real contact in baseball. Like, you can't, right? It's a shit show. Okay. You're basically hitting this button and you're hoping that you hit the ball. I mean, you're just hoping you make contact. But with the batter's stance, now if I make contact, I can kind of place the ball in the left third of the field, because I've got that closed stance. Or if I want to place it in this third of the field. Now there's randomness that happens all over the place, but that was another part of it. So Rick came up with that, and I was like, this is great. This is great. This allows us to take something that is otherwise a cheap controller and bring something more that seasoned gaming baseball enthusiasts would really appreciate. Now, I don't know. I don't think I ever got fan mail back then. So no one was writing to me and saying, Taylor, the whole stance thing was really on the money. Like, I didn't get that kind of feedback back then, right? The internet had not really taken off in a meaningful way. It was just the beginning. I think the internet started, it left CERN Labs in like 92 or 93. So it's 30 years ago. Yeah, we didn't really have that kind of feedback, but that was important. Now let's go back to the stats engine. Now, oh boy, when I started to listen to these guys and they were telling me, and you guys can tell me, you guys are, I'm assuming you guys are true experts on baseball. Is that fair? Is that fair? You guys are it? You guys are the real deal? No, you're shaking your head. Well, good. Then I can make a bunch of shit up. Kidding. Okay, Steve, you're the expert. Okay. So imagine me, right? I'm 29 years old, 28 years old. And Rick's like, how to compute a win, a loss, and a save? Well, it's a little bit complicated, because if you're ahead and then you swap in the pitcher and you're behind and he throws pitches and he manages to win the game, it's a save and a win, but it's a loss, it's this, and the other pitcher gets a loss and this guy gets this, and it was just like my head was spinning. And I'm trying to simulate my head back 30, well, I'm 20 odd years ago. Was it 20 years ago? Oh boy. No, that was 30 years. I just said it. No, man, when was it? When the hell was it? It was 90. Yeah, it was 95. 95. So that is 28 years ago. Is my math that bad? When you get old, you just like can't do math anymore. But anyways, a long bloody time ago, I was young and foolish, and I was like, you're baffling me with all this. Right? And then there's American League. I'm sorry, did I mention that? There's American League and there's National League. And they're not exactly the same. Okay? They're not exactly the same. Some of it's the same, but there's little things, little quirks here and there, and a blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, you guys, you're killing me. So what he suggested, and I agreed to, I didn't have him do this. He suggested this. Credit where credit is due. He said, I am going to pseudocode the rules of baseball statistics tracking for you. And I was like, oh, pseudocode. So what he would do is, pseudocode is, I don't know if we didn't invent the idea, but it was like he would type English words like, if this, then this would happen, except in this case, but on a rainy day, it's this, and then this. And he would just write language, because he's not a programmer. And I would take his pseudocode and I converted that into C code. We programmed everything in C. You got some C programmers here, I'm sure, on this call. So that was how we tackled that, because I had so much responsibility. There's no way I could go through the rule books. I mean, you guys ever dove into those books? I mean, it's like there's no way that you can do that. And I would have been divorced twice. If that were the case, and so basically, he pseudocoded the whole engine. But there's more to it than that. When I wrote Hardball II, and I was a total noob at 21, I can't overstate that enough. I would be like, if the runner from home hit the ball and ran to first base and got safe on first. It was like, he's got a single, right? Hey, it sounds good. Single. Oh, but the ball went out of bounds. Like it was high and it went out of bounds. Well, yeah, it was a baseball game simulation. You're like, well, that doesn't count. Go back home. Or the runner, something would happen and runners would have to go back, some reset, some situation in baseball where you'd have to put the runners back. Well, you've upgraded all the stats. You've increased the single, the double, the triple, all the numbers are base taken, what have you, right? The batting average was computed. And it was like, but it's going back. So you had to reverse all that. You had code that said, well, they ran back, so you better subtract all that stuff away. And I was in it so deep. I was like, oh God, and I got it working. But you know, if you're a programmer, right, just getting something working is not, you don't pat yourself on the back too much for that. And you know, a lot of people can get stuff working, but does it work well? Is it really, is there bugs? Is there edge cases that you haven't thought of? So when Heart and Triple Play, I realized something. I was like, you know what? Let the play completely happen, right? There's someone at home. I mean, there's a batter up to bat. There's people on the bases or not. You let the play go, and you take the state of the game. Like you say, you take a state, like, which is easy because you've got 4 things to record that there's people on, and you take that array with that data, and then when you finish the play, you take the 4. You only really need, well, yeah, you can take the 4 because maybe the batter had to go back, and you send that to the stats engine. Now think about this. The stats engine can be isolated. Now, and the stats engine says, okay, what did the bases look like before the play? What did the bases look like after the play? And what I realized is you could derive everything from those 2 data sets. And then it was nice and clean. Yes, Steve, you're thinking this through. I like that. Where were you 30 years ago? Could have used you, man.
That's a different webinar.
Okay. All right. Is that what this is? Are we in a webinar right now? Oh my God. Thank you for, oh my God. Now is my hair okay for a webinar? Okay. So that was fun for me. I loved things like that. I loved having these eureka moments where I was like, I have just grossly simplified my life, because now no matter what the engine does, it's decoupled. The word is decoupled. I'm in enterprise cloud. I'm actually talking to you guys from Sinclair Broadcasting right now. Okay. Decoupling means you can just kind of have your head here, or you can have your head over here, and you can think through something, and you can make it, and you can really solve the problem in a much cleaner way. So that's what we did. So that's how the stats engine worked. It was pseudocoded by experts. I converted it into the engine, and I built this stats engine model that was able to build the stats after the fact. And I had a very clear understanding of attributes like power, accuracy, things that would affect the way you contact the ball. Okay, that you could describe a slugger and say this slugger's got a lot of power, but the slugger has maybe less accuracy than someone who can place the ball and isn't going to hit a homer, but it's going to drop it back over here in left field because you're going to move everyone around from maybe first to second, right? Or whatever the thing is the coach has got in mind. I mean, God help me, I am not a baseball coach. I would not, I've never tried to even fool anyone to thinking I was an expert on baseball. But the point is those attributes are there's something that you would come up with that would describe a player. And then if you do it right and you run that simulation 10,000 times, you should see stats. You should see a 300 batting average or a 330 or a slugging percentage. It's like whatever. You should see those numbers. Those numbers are the derivatives of these attributes, right? But you don't want to use the statistics and stick them into the attribute. You don't want to conflate an attribute with a statistic. So that was another big moment. So I don't know if you guys are doing anything with having some fun, doing some baseball simulators that run, as an engine, like a chess engine or something, but it's really important to separate and disambiguate the two. So those are some of the big things. Now, the last thing I'm going to tell you guys about is bringing the fake baseball fun. Now, you probably can't even imagine what I'm going to tell you next. But you guys know what a home run stealer is, obviously, right? Or no? Did we make that up? Did I dream that? Okay, a home run stealer is when an outfielder runs to the back wall, the ball is going over the fence. It is literally going over the top of the back wall, or whatever you want to call it. It's going over, and a guy jumps up with his glove and he snatches it before it can go over the back fence, and denied, right? Home run stolen. We call those home run stealers. Do they call them home run stealers today? Or am I just
this year in Canada we called it a Kevin Kiermaier.
Oh, you guys Canadian?
Just me.
Oh, just you had me freaking out.
Oh, sorry. Tim is too. And I should have noted, and I meant to say something, but I wasn't 100% certain. But he's got a Toronto Maple Leafs cap on, as you could see. You know, I think he's one of these guys that are hoping that they win before he dies, like my father.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair. Well, I hope so too for you.
I remember the Leafs winning cups.
Wow. I
haven't been alive since they've won one. And I remind my father of that every time I can.
Nice. Nice. Home run stealers. And then, of course, the famous double play and triple play. Well, if it's a triple play baseball game, you sure as hell better have a triple play. But, you know, those are rare. And we basically knew that if we left the engine simulation to its own devices, none of these things would happen. We had to hard code them, you know. I remembered the name of the original game now. When I remember it was earlier, I was trying to remember. It was Line Drive. It was Line Drive. The idea that just hammer it right down there. And when you do a line drive and the shortstop jumps, even though the game wasn't called Line Drive, we had line drives. The shortstop jumps horizontal like a soccer goalie, right? He's just floating through the air horizontally and snaps the ball out of the air and falls down, and then can, you know, throw it to the first baseman with second baseman's running back and get a double play. I think that's a double play, right? Or am I wrong? Am I imagining things? But anyways, the line drive, well, you're like, the player can't react. The player has this cheap Sega Genesis controller. They can't react and snap a ball that's being driven that hard and that fast right through between second and third. So we had to hard code it. So what I would do is I would have when the ball was going in that direction and I decided it was going to be a low, flat, fast hit right through the infield, I'd pick a player and I would hard code the distance. And so that the animation of the little guy would be perfect. So he would run over and snap the ball at the exact right second. Now, if you guys are true blue baseball and got computer enthusiasts, this should break your heart a little bit. Okay. It's been 30 years though. So I think I'm okay. I'm safe. Okay. But I wouldn't have said a word about this before, because we basically knew that when you're sitting in your living room with your friend, you needed that. You needed that little like, snap that ball right out of the air. It was action. It was fun, right? Right. And people, it doesn't happen that often. You had to be judicious and making sure you didn't abuse your privilege of basically your God, and you're controlling the game, you know, and you're making fun things happen. Fun things would happen. There was a bunch of that. And I remember when Bruce came into my office and he said, Chris, we're going to have to do some of that kind of video game magic. I was just like, oh God, we're compromising the integrity of the experience. And I was like, okay, fine. And George Samilski was the artist on it, and he came up with these great animations. One of my favorites was leading off of first. Like this little crawl action. We'd watch real baseball, and the guys would crawl, and the pitcher, and the guy, oh, and he'd jump back, and we'd slide, and there was a frame in the animation that was told the engine that you were safe. otherwise you'd be out. And obviously, and we had these beautiful animations, but we had to have one for every increment. So if you incremented once, you had a quick step. If you incremented away from the bag twice, it was 2 steps. If you had too far away, dive, grab the bag. So every single situation was taken into account for that. And I love that. I just love that. And I don't even think anybody really liked it or wanted it, but I was like, I'm doing it. This is when you're the engineer and you're coding, writing the code. You do what the hell you like. Okay. This is the power that you have. And you're working weekends and evenings. I made more money in overtime. Of course, this is Electronic Arts, and they found out by the Canadian Labor Code that even if we were salaried employees and we worked overtime, this was a beautiful time for an employee. They owed us for overtime, and then if you worked past a certain number of hours, you got double time and a half, and double time. So I was raking in the dough. It was like, this is great. But I never left the office, and my wife left me. Did I mention that? Of course I did. So you guys can think I'm holding a pile of cash, and then I get divorced and I just hand her the cash, and then I'm free to go. So that was the story of triple play baseball in my personal life. It was actually a lot of fun. I could probably go into more detail than that. There's one thing that I want to share with you guys, and then I'm pretty much done, is that when I was told to do Hardball II in 1988, I didn't really want to. Like, in my heart, I wanted to make games with tanks and jets and bombs. And sadly, I've gone from being a total bomb-loving freak to a pacifist. I can't stand war. It just makes me sick. And it was really weird. So I've done a 180 personally since then. So if I was me, I'm more likely to make a baseball game today than I would have then. Like, it's just a weird personal growth that I've been on. And I still might. But the reason I bring this up is because what I didn't realize at the time, when I wrote the code for Hardball II, I had to roll up my sleeves and I had to build an engine that was so efficient, that did 3D math so efficiently, that's what gave me the skills and the ideas and the techniques to do Total Annihilation, which is the ultimate in name and in gameplay, the ultimate war RTS game where everything blows up. If you guys ever wonder about that, you can Google Total Annihilation. And it's completely over the top game where there were tanks and planes and ships, every theater of water, land, air. So it was really interesting. And I needed that. Knowledge, and I just didn't realize that baseball was going to give it to me. So to say baseball has been very, what is it? Very, very good to me. Is that the famous quote? I don't know who said that. Oh, should look that up. But baseball has been very, very good to me. It gave me the skills that I needed to really jump out there and have a really wonderful career in gaming and build Dungeon Siege. I designed Dungeon Siege. I didn't build it. I had a great team working on that. And then, of course, Supreme Commander, which was an over-the-top, completely gigantic, insane real-time strategy game that is still played today on Steam, and that came out in 2006. So that's going to have its 20th anniversary, and that game is played all over the world. And in fact, people have rebuilt these games from scratch. And the legacy of those games continues, which makes me proud. Although I sold off all the IP, I own the IP for Dungeon Siege and Supreme Commander, and I sold it to Square Enix, the Japanese gaming company. So they own it now. And you know what, though? People say to me, I'll volunteer some stuff you guys don't want to know, and they say to me, Chris, when are you going to make Dungeon Siege 4, or when are you going to make Total Annihilation 2? And I said, well, there might have been a time and a place to do those things, or Supreme Commander 3. But if you're a creative person do you really, really want to make the same game iteratively over and over again, or do you want to make something different? So I'm making a game called Rock War. It's Intergalactic Space Empire Rock War. And you can read about it on my Kanugi site. It's not ready yet. And it's all about the conquest of space, about our asteroid belt that we have that's got all the constituent elements of a planet in it, you know, one iron and gold and this and silicon and what have you. And you mine that and you build an army of robots that fight each other. Total Annihilation, by the way, was all robots. There was no human death in Total Annihilation. Isn't that an oxymoron to have a game that's that over the top and that violent, and it was all robots? And then in Supreme Commander, that was wearing thin a little bit, so I made just the Supreme Commander human, and it was you. You were the Supreme Commander commanding your armored command unit. And you were a human on the battlefield and everything else was bots. But hey, when you were there for your own purposes ish. And, you know, when you lost your life, it was voluntary. It wasn't, conscripts and people thrust into this. So it was kind of like a little altruistic of me. I'm always trying to get a message across of some form. And that was my thing. But man, I think that's probably a good stopping place, because I can talk, when you do something for 30 or 35 years, you get a few stories along the way. And you really just have baseball was one. Oh, I have one last thing. I did another baseball game at Electronic Arts, and it was called Virtual Stadium Baseball for the 3DO. And it was because Japan had a big baseball playing audience. And they thought it was a good idea, the executives at Electronic Arts, to put out a baseball game for the 3DO. Now, it was more powerful, but it was really expensive, and it hadn't sold very many. So I did it. And I took Triple Play, the engine. We redid the graphics. We made it 3D, and we made a version for the 3DO. So I actually did 3 baseball games in my life. And I might do a fourth, and I might do a web baseball game at some point, because hell, I kind of know a thing or two about how to build baseball engines, and they're really not that complicated. At 57, I should have been able to build. I say that because of all the knowledge I've gained, not because of my inherently how old I am. But I should probably be able to build a baseball game in 3 months, top to bottom, because there's just not that much to it. If I will still need to call old Rick up and say, hey, Rick, can you pseudocode me the engine? And he'd probably be happy to do it. But it's a nice thought to think that I might return to baseball someday. That's it.
Chris is a good Canadian boy. Why didn't you create a hockey game?
Well, there was a hockey game for the Sega Genesis done out of San Mateo, I think, ironically. It was the Americans that did the hockey game. NHL with, they had John Madden football. The NHL, did it have an IP? Oh, I think it was done out of Florida, actually, a studio. You know what? You guys might find it on Moby Games or something like that. But yeah, I know. That's a good question. I know you were joking, but we probably should have got everything. It was all twisted, right? The baseball game should have been done in the US. We should have done hockey. FIFA soccer. I think Canada is more a soccer country than America. I think America's got football. So they're pretty absorbed with football. When I say they, I mean me and us now, because I'm in America. I've been in America for almost 30 years. So I'm almost at country equilibrium. Is that a concept that maybe we can just start that concept today, where you're living in 2 countries and there's like one particular day where you cross over from living longer in one country than you do. You can tell people. If
you still say A, then you're Canadian.
I don't know. Did I slip one in there?
Oh, I don't know.
I did. You heard it?
Barry's counting. Yeah.
Barry's got a Costco entry guy, just making sure that the number of.
Your first sentence was Canadian. I had something.
Oh, yeah.
The word out. I don't know.
Once a Canadian, You know, I'm proud of Canada. I think Canada's great, but you know, I'm here in America, and I try to, you know.
Have you said you're sorry?
I said I'm sorry to Canada.
No, to anybody. Canadians always
yeah,
say
yeah,
they're
yeah. I
sorry.
do. I get called out. You know, when I was 20, I did stand-up comedy. I know, hard to believe, right? When I was 20, I did stand-up comedy in Vancouver at this little place in Gastown called Punchlines. So I'm up there on stage. I got the microphone. I'm a total idiot with the microphone. And I go, you know, I lived in Surrey for 20 years. Surrey is where I was born. And I go, before I realized that I could just leave. And the Vancouverites thought that was the best joke of the night. They just busted up every time. Just so they never saw that one coming. But yeah, because Surrey was like the butt end joke of the greater Vancouver, the area. If you guys know the greater Vancouver area, Surrey was like, oh, he's from Surrey. He'll never bring a little tear to my eye. He'll never amount to anything. He's from Surrey. That's why when I got on the map and I was doing press and I was everywhere, I was like, I'm just a dumb kid from Surrey. What do I know? You know, so that was like my line. I threw that around a lot. Anyway, with that, you guys have any questions about any of that? We've got a few minutes.
In your baseball analysis, did the term Markov chain come up?
Mark-off chain. No.
Okay.
Have I got that right? Mark-off.
Markov, it's a man's name.
Oh, a man's name, Markov.
Yeah.
I don't know. Was he a player back in the 80s? And
No, he was a mathematician.
Oh, well, let me check your name. Make sure that none of you guys, he's not on this call. I don't want to say anything stupid. No.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
No. Hey, I trotted out Occam's razor. I thought I'd get some cred with you guys.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So this is my first time being on this webcast or whatever, and I spent the better part of the last year and a half or so getting back into tabletop baseball games, mostly with dice and cards and whatnot, and building a lot of spreadsheets and reverse engineering a lot of games from the 70s and so on. So that's my background and a little bit of programming way back when. But I found your comment interesting about the engine and it being attribute driven. And I'm only aware of one tabletop baseball game that kind of uses that model, if you will. And so I just found that intriguing because most of the games I'm familiar with, including one that I did when I was 19, basically use the stats and the probabilities and produce representative outcomes and so on. But driving it through attributes is quite interesting to me. So yeah. You've described it, but I don't know if you have any more to say about how you figured out what the attributes were, how you weighted them, and so on.
Yeah, well, because what happens when you run the engine all night long, you start to see where feeding the stats back in, you start to see what happens when you do that. It mutates. But if you stick attributes in and you run the engine, it would settle down. The stats would settle down and become consistent, which is like
maybe I'll ask a question a different way. Was it trial and error then in terms of we're gonna weight the impact of this attribute more or less, and then run it overnight and you look at the resulting stats and how did you?
We didn't work that hard at it because we knew people were going to play. It's really important that attributes drive the game when you're playing against a computer opponent, because it's a computer opponent that's trying to simulate and play at the efficacy that team is playing at. And I don't think we took it very seriously, but you really, but it was Hardball II that I did the gameplay. I'd play whole leagues. I'd go home and I'd hit a button and I'd go home and it would play a whole whatever league or you know what I mean, play a whole season. I'd come back and that's when I realized we didn't have an ideal system, but we shipped that. And then on triple play, I changed to attributes, and then the guys came up with the attribute numbers, and they play tested the game. We had a whole play testing organization, and then they were happy with the way the game played, and I just gave them the tools. I mean, that was a big production compared to Hardball II. It's like me and I had an artist, and there was a guy who built some library code and a sound guy. I mean, it was minimalistic. So we were doing everything, but triple play. So I built that attribute driven model, and then just the guys played with it. But you can start to see it if you run a model in your own head. You'll start to see that, you know, like when a baseball player goes out to play baseball for his very first time, he doesn't have statistics. He has attributes. You know, and that's what derives the statistics. And so you realize, yeah, if you push those statistics back in, they'll never change. They'll never have bad days, good days. They'll never move away from those statistics, which might be good enough for games where people are playing for fun. You know, they're not too wrapped around it. There's always a place where, you know, audiophiles hear things that no one else can hear, and you're like, you're silly. It's almost like it's an insult. You're an audiophile. You've gone too far. Your cabling is gold plated. Why? Nobody cares. I think baseball could do the same thing, but most people are just having fun with it, and games do have to ship. But we called it shipping, by the way, back then. Shipping. We had to ship the game because they were physical. But yeah, attribute driven is really I'm surprised. You're kind of blowing my mind right now that people that's not a popular thing. That is not a conceptually established idea.
I do some.
There's a chance I misspoke, but in terms of the games I'm familiar with, there's only one that kind of uses the attribute driven approach. It's called History Maker Baseball.
Okay.
But behind the scenes, I think it's effectively still using stats. Well, I know it is, but anyways.
Well, what's cool, right, is you could have like an injury, like say someone has an injury, and you could say it affects their strength. Their strength is 10% less or 20% less because they're favoring, right? And you go, well, yeah. So now their batting average over that period of time might drop down. It's really hard to simulate that otherwise, right? What are you going to do? Arbitrarily knock some batting average off? I mean, say they're injured? See, what happens is when you have attributes, you have a whole bunch of things that get fed into the engine. When you have statistics, you have you mask the source of where they come from. So in other words, it's like when you do a bunch of math and you get one result. You're looking at one result. So you're going to take one result, modify it, and feed it back into the engine. It's sort of it's like feeding pigs to themselves. We don't do that, right? I mean, at least we shouldn't do that. We don't feed an animal to itself. We should think about the engine like an animal. We don't want to feed it to itself. I know that's dark, but anyway, I can tell you guys are cracking up tonight.
Could you give an example of what you mean by an attribute? Like, what's an example of one attribute?
Like power, strength.
Okay, because it was interesting that Barry mentioned the Markov chain, because baseball really it's a Markov chain. It's transition state changes because there's 24 possible transitions or states in baseball, and so it's a Markov chain through that. And one of the things I do is I try to simulate using those transition state change probabilities. Now, when I do it, it's very simple, but I don't consider power or anything like that. I just consider all the transition state change probabilities for any batter against the pitcher who's pitching against him. Now, when I do this, I can simulate a game, and I have to simulate a game 100,000 times to get the outcome, but it's always the same. The result of what one 100,000 game simulation is exactly the same as another 100,000 game simulation.
If it's determinate, then you've got something that works.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how far down the rabbit hole you go. And by the way, you guys are talking to a guy who hasn't done this stuff in decades. So, I hope I'm not, giving you the wrong impression.
No,
I'm not a subject matter expert on simulating baseball games by no means.
It's interesting because one of the things I want to move on to is to create the statistics from my game simulations and see do the players throughout the course of the season accumulate statistics, home runs, RBIs, etc., batting average, similar to what they did in real life, because I know I can calculate the transition state change probabilities for the past season. That I'm always doing that on the fly. Now what I want to do is run the season after the fact and see if they generate the same actual statistical totals, which to me validates my model, if that's what I'm getting to.
Yeah. Well, I like the attributes thing. I mean, I have to admit, I don't know much about the change state way of computing the result of a confrontation, I guess, between a batter and a pitcher. But I will say, if you follow the attribute side, you can go down the line of, you can say modify, like they're not as good when it's raining, or they're not as their concentration isn't good when they're away. They're playing in an away field. Their accuracy drops down. Like you could tweak and tune the knobs on a whole bunch of attributes going into the engine, and you'd have real clarity. You could justify it. You could model it. You could say, I know what I'm like if it's a Monday game versus a Friday game, or if it's an afternoon game versus a morning game, or if it's on AstroTurf versus if it's on real sod or whatever. Like you could probably really build an incredible engine that does that. Because when you have your chain, I don't know if you're taking into account things like, well, did they have a party the night before and they were drinking and they're coming in and they're a little foggy? I mean, you guys know all of this matters, right? Someone's mother's in hospital, they lose focus, right? They get a phone call an hour before they have to play on something that the IRS is auditing them. Right. I mean, this could be fed into the attribute side of the engine. I would not want to feed that into the statistical side. I would not want to drive it through the statistical side. Anyway, just thoughts off the top of my head, just kind of being playful.
Yeah, I was thinking along the lines, just fatigue, right? This pitcher's been used 5 straight games or something, you get that type of thing. If the Cubs playing, half of their games during the day, how does that affect them versus, everybody else playing night games?
Sure.
But like you said, you could go down the rabbit hole, and where do you stop?
Right? Yeah. Did they fly? Did they take a bus?
Yeah. Part of the challenge, and the guys on the call know this much more than I, is there might actually be data that you could use to program the attributes, but it might be based on small sample sizes, so you don't know if the variability is coincidental or has an underlying root cause. But for purposes of video-based games like you're talking about, the attribute approach seems to make a lot of sense.
It's interesting. Go ahead. Sorry, when you say things like, who's had an argument with his wife the night before and things like that, I used my model to assist me in wagering on baseball for a couple of months this summer. And it was really interesting. I made a little bit of money, but that's all I'll say, is because I made a little bit because I didn't bet very much. But it was fun to try to stack what I could do against what was happening in the real world. And one of the conclusions I came to is I can't understand why anybody would try to bet on baseball for a living, because for me, there's too many little teeny tiny things that you just don't know about. And not the least of which, of course, is the fact that the people running the gambling sites are absolutely up to date in real time. But you just don't know all the things. Yeah. And all those little things that you don't know conspire to make a good bet into a bad one. And it absolutely took all the fun out of watching baseball because of all those little things that you just don't know. So I just said, okay, I've had fun with this for a couple of months.
Yeah. Well, I think you're on the right track, though, when you simulate something, 10 million times. 100 million times, a billion times. We can do that now. And if you build an attributes model and you feed it into your engine, and you could run it 1 billion times or 10 billion times. I mean, hell, why not? I mean, you got an NVIDIA graphics card with the 10,000 processors or cores running on it. Why not? Code that up in CUDA and just let her run. And you know what? I bet you that would be an interesting thing. And then you put in all the numbers and you see whether you can get close to how these guys are performing.
My problem is I'm completely self-taught at this. And so I've taught myself Perl, MySQL, and R. I went down the rabbit holes with some of the books that are out there. Max Marchi's book, Joseph Adler's book. But I've taught myself everything. And what I want to do is take the next step. Everything I have is coded in Perl. And I've got 4 computers at home. This one is the big one that does all my baseball work. And I've got a really badass video card in it. But I can't take the leap to code in CUDA and do that. So I'm stuck now with my 100,000 times limit. One of the things I'm interested in is trying to figure out how to optimize batting order using the same methodology. But with batting orders, you've got 362,880 combinations for any 9 players. And when you simulate those 100,000 times, it takes a long time, even on this smoking hot machine here. So I want to use my video card, and I'm waiting for somebody out there to post how to do it in Perl so I can jump on the bandwagon.
Yeah, Tim, have you read Mark Pankin's work on batting order?
Probably. I've read a lot of different stuff.
Okay, because some conclusions are if you have the same 9 guys, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, when I do it in my model, I test it against the best 9 batters, top to like the best batter first, worst batter last, flip it around, but I also go through in each season and figure out what's the batting order that the team preferred to use and run it against that. And my optimal batting order is always better than what they've been doing. So I'm just trying to because I can show this graphically what attributes in what transition state change attributes are contributing, trying to figure out what makes a good first batter, the second batter, the third batter. But to do that, I need more horsepower.
Well, this isn't going to simplify your life at all, but with machine learning and large language model development now, there's ways to do these things differently by training them. And if you go to, maybe if you just go online and you go to Google's, or you can ask it a question. You could say, hey, what's the easiest way for me to train a large language model to process batting information? You just ask it with natural language and it'll come back and give you an answer that you might find interesting. And then if you have the data and you say, can I give you the data? And it'll say, sure, just put the data into the command line, and it'll say, thank you, let me look at it. And it'll compute it, and it might come back and tell you something interesting. And then if you say, can you write me a program in CUDA to simulate based on these attributes, it should come back with an actual program for you. Have you guys tried that?
No.
It's scary. I mean, if I screen shared and showed you this, we could probably do it right here, right now, live on this call.
You kind of broke up when you mentioned the tool, but it sounds like a version of ChatGPT or something similar.
Yeah, you could use ChatGPT. I use Google. I have Google Bard running on my machine, like just have a window open all the time with Bard. I took my son wrote an essay for school, and I copied it out of Google Docs, and I just pasted it in a Google Bard. And I said, can you tell me, I asked the question first. I said, if I give you an essay, will you go over it, analyze it, and critique it for my son? And it says, sure, go ahead and paste it in there. And it goes, It goes, well, this is a very interesting story, and it shares a lot of personal information and anecdotes from your life. It was freaky. If you guys haven't used that, you can just go online and sign up and start playing around. I highly recommend it for 1,000 different reasons, but it'll write code for you. And it might actually give you the code you're interested in. And you can try ChatGPT, you can try Bard. It's amazing that I forget we're living in the future every day. You know,
these chat and Google Bard you're killing us post-secondary educators. You're killing us.
Sorry, I didn't build it. I didn't invent it. I'm just,
and I was just gonna say, betting on baseball is a sucker's bet, because even a team that wins 100 times in a year is still going to lose 62 times.
Yeah, but you don't bet on them all. I could go on and on about it. You have to learn to pick your spots. But what drives you crazy in baseball is when you've got something good going and somebody gets distracted by God knows what in the ninth inning and they blow the lead. And you're going, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened. So it really takes all the fun out of watching the game.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Chris,
hey,
I got a quick comment related
Yep.
to what you said. REPL is an online IDE. I teach AP computer science. And so we do all of our programming in Java. And just 2 weeks ago, they dropped in their AI, their artificial intelligence. As of now, I'm actually letting my students use it, but they're not allowed to use anything that we haven't covered yet. So if they are using, they have to be smart enough to realize, oh, we haven't learned about arrays yet. We haven't actually done looping yet. So they have to like limit themselves. So they have to kind of really know what they're doing. So we're trying it out for now, but we'll see. AI is here to stay. So
yeah, that's pretty amazing. Well, I'll wrap up by saying I hope you guys got something out of this hour and 7 minutes, and it wasn't a waste of your evening. I've never had anyone call me ever. Derek, you're the first to ask to hear about baseball. Everyone else wanted to know about Total Annihilation or Dungeon Siege or Supreme Commander or running gas-powered games or blah, blah, but nobody really cared about baseball. And it was just a bridge. It was just a part of the story. And I always told the story of Hardball II's the way I built the engine, so it informed my other games. But thank you for inviting me and letting me ramble and tell you guys things you didn't ask to hear about.
Well, I do appreciate you coming on. If you don't mind hanging for a few more minutes, I got a couple questions for you.
Sure, I can do a couple more questions.
All right. So Hardball II, when I looked it up on Moby Games, there were 9 people credited. Triple Play 96, there were 62.
Yep.
So I can appreciate coordinating all of those different individuals to get to an end goal and be able to ship a product by a certain date, and everything's working how it should be. I'm assuming some of your later games, some of the non-baseball stuff, you probably had upwards of 100 people working on, I'm guessing, but
it went up at Electron House when I started. When I was working on Total Annihilation, it dropped down to about 28 people at the end. And then when I started gas-powered games on Dungeon Siege, it was in that 40 person range, and then Supreme Commander was 60. So when you're an independent studio, you have less money and you have to drop the team size down, and everybody works longer hours. But EA had infinite amounts of money when we were doing it back then. We had t-shirts, right? That it would give us. And it would say first $100 million year. And then we get a t-shirt that would say first $100 million quarter. This is revenue for the company. Then it'd be first $1 billion year. And then we had shirts that said first $1 billion quarter. Right. So you could imagine the money coming in from FIFA soccer was paying for anything that you wanted that you could possibly live out. Sorry, I just had to tell that old story because those were good times. And now,
if I could ask a quick question, since you went there, did they only compensate you in salary, or did you get any kind of equity?
We did. We got stock. I laughed when I got the stock grant because it was like 1,000 shares or something like that, and they were like $9 or something, and they were best over like I forget what the period was, 50 months. But then you get another tranche or whatever, you get another stock package, and then they start to vest, and then they overlap, and then over time, then the stock's going up. So when I left, I think I had $100,000 Canadian in stock in 96. And I used that to buy my house in Woodinville. And the IRS came looking for me from, not the IRS, the Revenue Canada came looking for me. And they said, you know, when you cash out stock like that, that's income. And I was like, yeah, I know. I moved to the United States. And they're like, well, we want our money. And so I said, but I spent it on a house. And they were like, well, then you got to pay us. And I was like, well, fine, I'll pay you, but I don't have the money. Are you telling me I have to sell my house? And they're like, well, we can't make you sell your house in the United States. So the Revenue Canada financed my house purchase at a really good interest rate in the US. Thank you, Revenue Canada. Sorry, that's a fun story. That's such a great story. People are like, whoa. And I was like, yeah, I did that shit. Okay, now I'm going to prison. Thanks.
Right.
You got the confession. How did you do it? That was magical. Anyway, sorry. One more question, Derek?
Yeah. Well, a comment and a question. So you mentioned Bob Whitehead, and for anyone that doesn't know, he wrote the original or programmed the original home run for the Atari 2600.
There you go.
I'm sure everybody's probably familiar with that one. That was more like stickball for the Atari 2600, I would say. But obviously, 2K cartridge, so not a whole lot to work with, right?
Crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So, and then went on to, like you said, Activision, and formed Accolade with Alan Miller from Activision, I believe it was, right?
Right. Yeah. David Crane.
David Crane. Yep. Yeah.
At Activision. I don't know if David Crane went on to. I don't know if David Crane went on to Accolade, but he was definitely there at Activision. He did Pitfall, not. The famous Pitfall.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I guess my question is, okay, first game that you ever did, Hardball II. You're 21 years old. You're thrown into, hey, okay, we want you to do this game. Did they give you any guidance as far as, here's what we want it? We want it to retain the similar look and feel to Hardball. We want these features, or did you kind of have carte blanche as far as, here's what it's going to look like, here's how it's going to perform? Yeah,
there was an artist, Tony Lee. Oops. And Tony drew the art. And Tony obviously had his own artistic, and I didn't care. Like, Tony gave me the art and I put it in the game. And so just to the team size, right? Like, I was the engineer, Rick Friesen did the libraries, Tony did the art, Chris Hatlella did the music. It was that, the team was like that simple. And I put the art in, and the art defines a lot of the look of the game, right? The little dudes that ran around the field, and they were teeny because the graphics were 320 by 200 resolution. There was hardly any pixels to work with, right? And I could tell you so many stories about that, but the truth is that I just tried to maintain, and when I did the front end work with Tony, we had the little flag, a little American flag waving on that bar at the top. And then when Chris did the music, Take Me Out to the Ball Game on the PC, you guys know how terrible the PC speaker was back in 1980, in the 80s, right? It was just terrible, right? But it was, cool. It was terrible cool. I mean, I don't know what you call that. And so to answer your question, I think we had a lot of creative control. What I didn't have is any direction on sort of the gameplay like I had on Triple Play. It was basically make the damn thing work. Make it work. You swing, you push the button when the bat has all these frames, right? So you have and then contact frame. And when you're on contact frame, which could be like frame number 9 or 8 or whatever the frame was, you're like, is the ball somewhere around the bat, in the vicinity of the bat? And if it was in the vicinity, you got contact. And then what you want to do is if the ball was here, you want to put the ball in front of the bat, and then you want to send the ball out on the trajectory. So what you would do, now this part you guys are going to get a kick out of, is you can either add a velocity or you can pick a spot out in the field where you want the ball to go, and you can make the ball go to wherever you decide. You can do it either way, depending on how you, and you guys are, now that I know a little bit more about you, I think you appreciate that, rigging the election, so to speak. That's top.
The whole launch angle and all, yeah, all that. Yeah,
because you can reverse calculate
exit velocity before we knew what it was, right?
Yeah, you can basically do all the calculations. Is it high? Is it low? And by the way, just because I haven't said it one time on this call, infield fly rule, ground rule double, we obeyed all those rules. And I remember walking around. It was like going to camp when you're a kid and then singing the camp songs for the rest of your life. I've been singing the camp songs from baseball for 30 years. I'll be like, talk to some baseball expert, and then I'll be like, do you know what a ground rule double is? You better. It was just fun.
Well, unless anybody else has anything, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap this up. But I do really appreciate you coming on and talking about the old games, and hopefully you do come back around and like you said, something a web game or something to compete with MLB The Show. I mean, that's kind of got the monopoly on the console side of things anyway. So.
It's interesting when we say web, people think, oh, web. You can do stuff in a web browser now that is insane. I'm building something here at Sinclair Broadcasting that is going to hopefully be really, really amazing. That'll run on your laptop, on your iPhone, your Android device, all of it, and it's going to be really crazy and weird. Web is incredibly powerful. I gave a talk in Seattle just this summer on, I said, the browser, not the web, the browser, because it's really, we're talking about the browser. It's an operating system. It's an abstraction. It's an operating system. I said, it's the future of gaming. I made a bold statement because I wanted to pack the room with people who were going to be argumentative with me. And I said, the browser is the future of gaming. And people are like, no. But I gave my presentation and I said, now how many of you think the browser is the future of gaming? And I got people to agree. It's why it's accessible and everything, including my refrigerator. My refrigerator has a screen on it, touch screen. You can play games on there. And it's everywhere now, and it's hard to have an Xbox or a PlayStation proprietary gaming system. And you'd say, well, they have a lot more power. They have tons and tons of GPU and power, but the power of the systems that browsers are running on are coming up. WebAssembly, Web GPU, I could go on and on. The optimizations of the Chrome's, Google's V8 engine that runs in Chrome, become incredibly powerful. So I'm completely and thoroughly convinced we can do anything today in the browser. So it should be hopefully interesting. All right, I'll shut up.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. Yep.
All right, so I will just hit the escape. I will hit the button, the leave button, and you will never see this face again. No, I'm kidding.
Exit to DOS, right?
All right. Take care, guys.
Take care. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Yep.
Bye.
Yep. Good night.
Thanks, everybody. We're not sure what the next meeting is unless Derek's got a date. I'm pretty sure we're not quite sure yet. We're still working on a few things. Again, if you have something you want to bring forward, bring it up. Okay.
Yep, let us know. Let us know. We're targeting, I think, end of November for possible speaker, and then I'm not sure beyond that. So
yeah, I'm working on a couple, but they don't seem to respond, so have to keep working.
Yep.
Thanks for letting me,
guys.
Chris.
Oh, you're always welcome to come, Steve.
Thank you.
Yep. Take care. Have a good night.
Good night.
Yep.
Night, everybody. I'm gonna sign off too, Derek.
Sounds good. Yep.
I got supper coming.
All right. Take care. We'll talk soon.
Okay. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.